Greetings, everyone. We're excited to be here today for this event, the first collaboration between NAREB Louisville and Kentucky Realtors. We appreciate everyone involved to be able to make this event possible. And I want to mention a few people that we want to recognize. I want to thank Mr. Charles Hinckley, our 22nd President 2021 KYR for allowing us to have this platform, and also Mr. Steve Stevenson, CEO at KYR. We appreciate you all. We want to recognize the visionary for our Diversity Inclusion Task Force that made this event possible, Mr. Lester Sanders, past president of GLAR and KYR. We also want to recognize Ms. Elizabeth Monarch with her leadership, and we're going to have her to say a few words at the end. And we appreciate you so much, Elizabeth, for making this possible. We know it wouldn't happen without you. I also want to recognize posthumously our NAREB event chairman, our NAREB event chairperson, in the name of Ms. Sharita Burris, who passed away this week. And we've been reeling about that, and it's made it a little tough for us. As a matter of fact, I'm just leaving the wake right now just to get to you all. But we want to recognize her. She was a fireball, and she was NAREB. I'm telling you, she epitomized what NAREB stands for, and we're gonna miss her. But she planted a lot of seeds, so we're gonna be okay because she planted a lot of seeds, and we thank her so much because this event she put it together, and so we're having it in her honor. I'd like to also mention our moderator of the evening. It's going to be Mr. Jeff Johnson II. He'll be our moderator. He'll keep things rolling for us. And our three speakers, we have some phenomenal speakers today. Oh gosh, we got to do this again because it's so phenomenal, the speakers that we have. I've got my pen and paper ready. That's why I had to make sure I had everything ready because I've got to take some notes. Because these folks, I'm sitting at the feet of some folks that are very astute in their fields, and they know what they're talking about. We're going to have a lot of facts today. You know, sometimes facts are hard to deal with, but they're going to be facts, and we have to just take some notes and just take it all in. It's going to be a lot to take in, and I'm not going to belabor the time because I know we want to get the speakers that get to the substance of things. So I want Mr. Will Fisher to come on, and if he wants to have a few words. He's a co-sponsor. I'm the sponsor as far as the NAREB Louisville is concerned. He's a sponsor with KYR as a co-sponsor. Mr. Will, you're on?
Yeah, I am here, Curtis. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Curtis, I think you said everything wonderfully and beautifully. And like you said, I believe that we have some wonderful speakers with some great material for us. So I don't want to take up too much time and reiterate anything. So thank you for that lovely introduction, Curtis. And yeah, I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say.
Okay, with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Jeff Johnson II to get us kicked off and started.
All right, good stuff. Well, welcome everyone to the line this afternoon. And Curtis, I appreciate the honor and privilege to be able to introduce some individuals that are going to share some information that I know that's going to be impactful today. And I'm honored to be here as well. And I'm excited for everything that's going to take place. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it this afternoon. Let's go ahead and start off with a gentleman who is the executive director of the Lexington Fair Housing Council. His primary responsibilities include initiating community outreach programs and overseeing staff and filing complaints. Prior to this, he's focused on the practice his practice on housing and housing issues and landlord-tenant laws. He also lectures to both landlords and tenants on a regular basis. This gentleman is a member of the Kentucky Bar Association, the State Bar of Georgia, and also the Florida Bar. Okay. This gentleman has received his BS degree in journalism with honors from the University of Florida. He's earned his JD degree, magna cum laude, from the University of Georgia School of Law, where he was a member of the Georgia chapter of the Order of the Court. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and bring on to the line, if we have this gentleman, if he's able to hear us, okay. Mr. Arthur Crosby. Mr. Crosby, did you make it on the line this afternoon?
I'm here and I'm ready. All right. Let's share my screen and we'll get into my part of the presentation. We're trying to set this kind of up to cover fair housing law. I'm going to cover a little bit about what fair housing law is, and then a little bit about why we need fair housing law. But mostly my presentation is going to be the sad part about the past and about why we're in a situation we're kind of in today. So as I go into it, my office is Lexington Fair Housing Council. It has Lexington, its title, but it really is a statewide organization. We're a nonprofit agency. We investigate claims of housing discrimination. We provide legal representation and advocacy. Again, we serve the entire state. Part of what we do is discrimination testing. So we do send out, both in rental and sales and lending, people of different races, different genders, different national origin, just to see if they're treated different. That's part of what HUD funds our office to do. But the main thing to remember is that we're a resource for the housing industry. We are not someone who is in business to try to catch people doing something wrong. Our business is to try to keep the things from being wrong in the first place. We don't make more money or get paid extra for filing complaints. We would like to resolve everything ahead of time. So keep that in mind as you work with us. And I'm going to put, if people do have questions, feel free to use the chat, reach out, or just stop and ask questions as we go along. Okay, so basically fair housing law, I'm going to cover some of it, and then we're going to talk about why we need it. But up until 1968, you could discriminate against any person for any reason. We did not have laws in place to prevent that. If you wanted to treat people because they were different, because of the color of their skin, it was perfectly allowed. But something happened in April of 1968. Anybody know what happened in April of 1968 that got the Fair Housing Act movement moving forward?
The death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's exactly right. And we talk about what the man did while he was alive. It's important to note he was still accomplishing things even with his passing. So I went too far there, but that's okay. Just bear with me. In April of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King passed, and within a week of his passing, they passed the Civil Rights Act. And originally, it just prohibited discrimination based on race, color, national origin, and religion. So race, color, national origin, and religion. That's what was protected. You had to wait a little bit. 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 1974, we get around to adding gender. Real quick, in the old days, if a woman wanted to buy a home, what'd she have to bring with her?
Her husband.
Her husband, that's right. So in 1974, we got around to adding gender and protection. In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed into the federal protections, disability and familial status. So you can't discriminate against families with children or individuals because of their disability. So those are the federal laws that are in place. We also have state laws in place that mirror those. Those have a similar kind of track. In 1968, there was two people in the state legislature, a Mae Street Kidd and a Georgia Davis Powers. Georgia Davis Powers really believed in civil rights. She fought hard for it. She really pushed for it. She wasn't getting anywhere for a long, long time in the legislature. But at that time, there came this divide in the legislature about daylight savings time. Half of the legislature wanted it, half did not. They came to Georgia Davis Powers and said, we need your vote on daylight savings time. And being the politician she is, she got them to vote for civil rights. So in Kentucky, we got civil rights protection because we really wanted daylight savings time. So that's the federal and state law. You also have local protections in certain places. So sexual orientation and gender identity. You see Louisville adopted a fairness ordinance in 1999. Lexington followed pretty shortly in 99. Covington added in 2003. Then it took a while. In 2013, Vico, tiny little town in Kentucky, added the fairness ordinance. And then you can see a number of cities has followed since then. And all of that in some ways less important because in 2020, there was a US Supreme Court case that's last year, Bostock versus Clayton County. It's an employment case, but it applies just as much to housing, the rationale. And basically it says sexual orientation and gender identity are protected as gender discrimination. So if you're discriminating against somebody because their sexual orientation, who their partner is, or how they present their gender, then that is gender discrimination. That was a 6-2 court decision with a number of Trump appointees siding with it. That seems to be pretty settled law at this point, that gender discrimination is not the #1 case we have, but it is clearly a, just having kids in high school, kids in elementary school. We are in a changing dynamic of how we view gender. People of my age, it hasn't quite caught up to us, but Young people, the use of pronouns. It's not going to be unusual for people to tell you what their pronoun is. It's not going to be unusual for people to not want you to make stereotypes or assumptions about what their gender is. And the one lesson I'm going to give real quick is just not to get real defensive on that, right? Like if you call somebody by the wrong gender, apologize quickly and move on. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't over apologize, but also don't try to explain why you decided what you did. Just these are things that will continue to come up. The more we try to fight against it, or somebody tries to fight against it, the clearly out of time and out of place we will be. So just as an awareness of where things are moving. So again, there are other protected classes. We talked about sexual orientation, gender identity. The other couple of interesting ones are in Louisville. We now have protections for veterans, homeless, criminal background, and source of income. Those went into effect in February or March of 2021. So those are brand new in Louisville protections. And I'll kind of go through those really quickly as well. Homeless status, basically you can't treat an individual different because they are homeless. So you can't treat them different in housing because of the fact that they're homeless. Now, if I'm a landlord, I can still ask for prior landlord references, which could, impact the person because they're homeless, but I can't just say I'm not going to rent to you, I'm not going to sell to you, I'm not going to show you homes because you're homeless. Another one is prior military service, which also includes active duty service. Can't treat somebody different in housing because of that. Lawful source of income, this might have been the biggest one that Louisville has changed, but basically just because somebody is on Social Security, public assistance, or even receives a Section 8 voucher, you can't deny them housing. So in Louisville, as of March 1, you cannot say no Section 8. You can't advertise that, you can't do that, you can't apply that in Louisville. And then the other one that came through the Louisville Ordinance, arrest history, and this is not just in Louisville, but this is across the board throughout the state. Landlords, housing providers, no one should be using arrest as an indication of anything bad toward a person or using it in any housing decision, as arrest does not necessarily imply that a person has done anything wrong. So arrest should not be used at all. Convictions in Louisville shouldn't be used either, except Louisville has created a series of exceptions to that, violent history. And I'll give the quick, even outside of Louisville, the basic idea on this is if you're going to use somebody's convictions against them, they need to be convictions that would be criminal history that would be relevant to that housing situation. So if I'm a landlord and a tenant has committed arson within the last week, that's probably going to be relevant to whether or not they're going to be a good tenant. That person had committed a marijuana possession charge 40 years ago. That's not going to statistically be relevant to whether or not they'll be a good tenant. Therefore, I wouldn't be able to use that. It's considered to have a disparate impact on minorities, people of color, African Americans when you do. So that's a real quick lesson through of the basic protected classes. And what does it apply to? And it really applies to anything. I mean, we could go through everything individually, but the quick answer, it just covers any part of housing. If you're dealing with housing, you can't discriminate on those issues. Making or giving loans, construction, improving, repairing, maintaining, selling, brokering, appraising, all of that is covered. And the fact of the matter is, as an office, we have relatively few problems with realtors. Realtors, for the most part, understand what fair housing is about. And fair housing is mostly about free market. Fair housing is mostly about people making sound economic decisions and not making those decisions based on economics, not on other irrelevant factors like a person's skin color, national origin. So realtors do pretty well with that. And I am not, and don't waste time talking to realtors about what I consider pretty obvious things, right? Don't refuse to serve somebody because of their skin color. Don't refuse to help somebody because they have a disability. Those are pretty easy things. There are some more gray areas that we will talk about and that become more complicated, but basically that's the basic part. So that is kind of in a nutshell where we are with fair housing law, but that's not all I really want to cover, because what I want to talk more about is the systemic issues, not the obvious issues, because I completely believe, this is very important, I completely believe in my job, we could do away with all intentional discrimination. We could stop and it does happen. It happens in the realtor business, it happens in the landlord business, it happens all over. People are still treating people different intentionally because of their color of their skin, because of their gender. I believe we could stop all of that tomorrow, and it would not change a lot of the systemic oppression that we've already put in place. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, before we do, I want to talk with you all about the things that you all are experts at, and which is, why do people live where they live? How do people choose the right neighborhood for them? What are the things that people do look at when they're trying to decide where to live? Give me some.
Well, in Louisville, it seems to be where you grew up.
Okay.
You tend to migrate there.
People stay in the same place where they grew up.
Schools.
Schools.
Proximity to work.
Proximity to work. Yep.
I would say quality.
Schools, I think, like when I talk to my friends, schools seems to be a huge one. That seems to be a quality of life.
Yeah, downtown area for entertainment, shopping.
Shopping, yeah.
Income.
But where you can afford. Absolutely, that seems to be that's a pretty motivating factor for most people too. Yeah, I agree with all those. I think, schools tend to be big, crime, safety issues, all of those seem to impact why people live in the neighborhood that they live. Now, I want you to take a look at this, and just in your own head, if you all can you all think of places of Louisville that are mostly Black? Can you think of areas of Louisville that are mostly Hispanic? Can you think of areas of Louisville that are mostly white?
No
And
comment.
if so, why? Why do we have that? Why are areas of Louisville mostly Black or mostly white?
I think people like to live in a neighborhood with people that they relate to and have friendships with. And so, and I've noticed that in the Hispanic community too. They all want to congregate together. They pick certain parts of town to live in.
I used to believe that, but now I kind of think that we put people there because in those areas because we didn't let them live elsewhere.
Well, that isn't what I'm seeing, Mike. I see specifically when I'm working with a Hispanic person, they tell me what part of town they want to live in. They're telling me in Lexington, they want to live off Russell Cave Road or in Cardinal Valley. They are choosing that.
So
I've shown property in other areas and they say, no, I just want to live in this place.
So let me just kind of put a pin in that real quick, or let me follow up on that. So in Lexington, there is a heavy Hispanic population in Cardinal Valley. It is predominantly in some ways Hispanic, and it's not by accident. But at this point, if you are a Hispanic individual and you walk in, let's say you walk into a building and there's two open rooms, and one has all the Hispanic individuals in it and one has all the white individuals in it, and one has all the Black individuals in it. If you're Hispanic, which room do you feel is appropriate for you? A lot of people will choose, they think once they see a certain crux amount of all Hispanics in one room and none in the other rooms, they will think that is where I am supposed to stay. That is where society is telling me. I think we are sending signals to people about where they're supposed to live. I think it is interesting because when I do this discussion and I talk about with my friends about where they want to live, or I talk with realtors about why people choose where they want to live, most people say people want to live with good schools, good, safe places where they can raise their kids safely, places that are with good shops, places close to employment. But then when I ask them about why all the Black people live in one place, they don't mention any of those reasons. They just say places where you feel comfortable. But we know in Louisville, the places where the Blacks predominantly are living, right? You'll see in this one slide, the blue areas, which were over 50% on the slide on your right, over 50% African-American, are the places that overlap with heavy eviction rates, poor school performance, poor medical performance, high crime rates. And it's not, look, is some of it economics? Yes, but there are other issues, other areas of Louisville here that you'll see that are not, that have those same economic issues, but aren't necessarily all African-American. So again, the other thing I want to point out is I will talk with people about the separation of race. And a lot of times people will just imply or tell me they think it's because that's how it's always been, or that it just happened organically. And I'm here to tell you that is not true. That is not what happened. And we'll go through a history lesson of why that is. And it starts with this. This is the beginning for Louisville. 1914, a Louisville ordinance. Now, before 1914, early on in Louisville, African Americans and whites were not segregated. Pre-Civil War, let's focus on this. Pre-Civil War, blacks and whites all lived together. Okay? We are more, Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, we are more segregated now than we were before the Civil War. And part of that was because of economic necessity. Pre-Civil War, everybody had to live together. You'll see old, where you have a big mansion and either a slave's quarter or servant's quarter nearby, right? People did not have the transportation ability to live separate from each other. So at that point, people had to live near the people where they were working or near help. So that was how things used to be. But we changed that. 1914, Louisville, like other cities, put in place a city ordinance, and I'll read it to you. An ordinance to prevent conflict and ill feeling between the white and colored races in the city of Louisville and to preserve the public peace and promote the general welfare by making reasonable provisions requiring the use of separate blocks for residences, places of abode, and places of assembly by white and colored people respectively. So there was a law that said, we are going to keep black and white people living separately because we think that's the way to maintain peace. 1914 in Louisville. Now, shortly after that case, Louisville actually made it to the Supreme Court. And this was a case involving Buchanan and Worley, Charles Buchanan and Professor Worley. And Buchanan was a white individual who sold his house to Worley. Worley was a black man. Worley could not move in because 8 of the 10 houses on that street were occupied by white. Worley was black, therefore he wasn't going to be allowed to live there. Worley said, I'm not going to pay you for that house if I can't live there. Buchanan said, yes, you are. Took it to Jefferson County Circuit Court, went to the Kentucky Court of Appeals, and the Kentucky Court of Appeals upheld the ordinance. But the Supreme Court eventually knocked down the ordinance. So basically, this was a contract case. It's not really even a civil rights case. It's a contract case that says basically that this shouldn't prevent people from contracts and that Worley had to pay Buchanan and was entitled to live in the property. So 1917, we move away from that ordinance that Louisville has, but other things start coming into place. A lot of times what you'll find are restrictive covenants. So this is from 1226 Summit Avenue, Louisville, Kentucky, 40204. This is a property that was built in 1949. You see similar deed restrictions in Lexington, Bowling Green, throughout. But in this one specific, this property shall never be sold, rented, leased, or occupied by any person or persons other than those wholly of the Caucasian race, except household servants employed by the owners of the property may live on the owner's property while in such employee. So that was a property built in 1949 that African Americans just weren't allowed to buy or to lease or to live in, except unless they were employees. That property is appraised at this point for $700,000, property that blacks were kept out of. Now, in 1948, there was a Supreme Court case on these cases. This was from out of St. Louis. And an African-American family, the Shelleys, moved into a neighborhood. Louis Kramer, who lived about 10 blocks away, didn't even live next door. He lived 10 blocks away. He sued to keep the black people from moving in. The Supreme Court in this case, which is again, said that they were not going to enforce this covenant. Now, they didn't say there was anything wrong. They said you can still keep the covenants in the deeds, people can still use them, but you can't use the courts to enforce them. So it didn't outlaw the covenants, it just said the courts will not enforce the covenants. This is in 1948. So the covenants continued to be in place. The one I showed you right before was from 1949, but the courts were no longer enforcing them. During all of this, 1928, as Louisville moves to specifically have black and white areas, they start changing the street names to separate where the white and black addresses are. So Chestnut becomes River Park Drive, Madison becomes Vermont. You ever drive around and wonder why a road changes names in what seems like the middle of nowhere? Sometimes it was designed specifically so you would know which was a black area, which was a white area. And so white people did not have to share the same address as a black person who lived down the street. So at this point, Louisville has become somewhat segregated. This is, your early 60s. And then to add, or to kind of finally put the concrete nail in that coffin, the Federal Housing Administration comes in, and this was between 1934 and 1968, but they put $120 billion into home ownership, because before the 1930s, there wasn't this idea of the 30-year mortgage. People wanted to buy a home, they pretty much had to have all the money available. But the government said, look, home ownership is very important. We want to promote home ownership. So there was a push for home ownership. And the way they did it was to put more money into it so people could take out loans without having to have an uncle die or everything under the mattress. So they put that $120 billion into home ownership. But what happened with it was, during that period, you would have people working for government appraisals would, in red, circular outline certain areas where they thought they would not be good investments for that money, and say, we need to steer clear of these areas, almost all because of minority presence. And they would put green circles or green areas where they would try to push the $120 billion. As we know, that has a long-lasting legacy effect that home ownership brings, right? When I do home ownership classes, the whole point of home ownership that we're talking to people is the ability to build wealth, the ability to build equity, not just for you individually, but the lasting effect that can have on your family. So in these green areas, as money comes in, home prices go up or down. Which one? In the green areas, what's going to happen? Home ownership prices are going up. Okay. And not just, it's not, again, not just for that one family, but you're able to take a bigger mortgage on the home, you send your kid to college, they get a better job, they buy a bigger house. It is a cycle of wealth that continues. And what happens in the red areas, those property values go down. They often become, there's pressure to sell, to leave, they become foreclosed, they become public housing. There is just a clear distinction between what happened to those areas based on intentional government action. All of the realtors during this point of time had within their code of ethics, a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood members of any race or nationality whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property values in that neighborhood. So realtors at this time were, by their code of ethics, making sure they did not try to put Black people in the growing, thriving white areas, or to try to diversify the areas, the African-American areas that were having the equity sapped out of them. Which gets you to where things are today at Louisville. Louisville has areas of wealth. Louisville has areas that are mostly white. And again, this is not just something organic, but this is something where, by design, by government plan. And we know that this will continue. So you look at the city of Anchorage, right, which is interesting or uniquely in Louisville, its own public school system, does not participate in the Jefferson County public school system. But within that city of Anchorage, it's 90.6% white and about 1.1% Black. The estimated median household income is $196,000 compared to the average in Kentucky's $52,000. Median home value $780,000, well above the Kentucky average. We also know that where you live, living in Anchorage has a lot of benefits for you. Your health conditions significantly better than the rest of Kentucky, and the schools do a lot better. 84, 88, and 84% proficiency in math, reading, and science compared to 48, 57, and 48. So again, it's not just about that one individual, but it's the cycle that the past has created, which then brings the difficult part for realtors at this point. Again, isn't that they're going to treat people differently, specifically based on a race, but what we do find sometimes with our realtor partners is that there occasionally individuals will steer people because they think that that's what they want. And there was a study done by the National Fair Housing Alliance where they looked at 12 metropolitan areas. They sent out testers just to see if people were treated different, Black versus white. What percent of the time do you think people were shown areas that were different based on their race? What percent of the time do you think came out?
90.
It's really, really close, 87%. So you're spot on. 87% of the time, if you were black, you were shown a black area. If you were white, you were shown a white area. Even though the black testers had slightly better, came in with higher income, slightly higher incomes, just slightly higher income, slightly higher mortgage availability. They also found that, you know, a lot of realtors would require pre-qualification for the black testers. They weren't told of the same incentives. The calls weren't returned, or they were just shown less property. So all of those things happened, but I think, you know, the one we really like to focus in on when we talk with realtors is about this steering and this idea of, if you're black, then I'm going to show you stuff where I think you'll feel more comfortable, which means in the more black areas. And we know if realtors do that, if they show black people specifically stuff in the black areas, not only are you not fixing the housing discrimination that happened in the past, where the legacy set out these kind of patterns of segregation, but you're continuing to add to it, and just making things worse. So this can be kind of complicated, because you will, as a realtor, have times where people will want you to discriminate. In fact, they feel like they are paying you to discriminate. That is what they want you to do for them. So you will have people who will come in and ask you questions like, what kind of people live here? Are the schools any good? Is it quiet around here? Do all the neighbors speak English? My mother-in-law is Korean. Are there any other Koreans nearby? And sometimes there will be people who will, this isn't a gay district, is it? Somebody uses the N-word around you. And I think it's important, as we talk through this stuff, for realtors to think through how you respond to these questions. Because we know if you just go around and say, well, I can't answer that because fair housing law won't let me, that's not a good response. They think you're trying to hide something, and they think you don't know what you're talking about, and you'll lose your customer base. So it becomes difficult navigating these things, especially when what a realtor does good is maintain connections. A good realtor forms relationships with the people that they're working with, and those people that you're working with start trusting you. And as they start trusting you, they will let down their guard. They will be a little more real. They'll be a little more honest. And as they're a little more honest, stuff will come out of their mouth. And how you handle and navigate that stuff will say a lot about you and about how things move toward that. So do people have some answers for me on these? What kind of people live here? How can we answer that question?
All kinds of people.
All kinds of people. I think that's a good answer. Are the schools any good?
I'll direct you to a website.
I think that's the right answer on that one too, right? We're not trying, because in that study I was telling of the 12 metropolitan areas, what they found was realtors would also often assume that areas of high minority concentration had bad schools. Even when they did, they would steer people away from that. Is it quiet around here? How do we answer that one? We know sometimes people don't want to be around kids. How do we handle that?
I personally would say, feel free to come around the neighborhood in the morning, afternoon, and see if you see anybody out, and see if you think it's noisy or not.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect answer on that one too. Do all the neighbors speak English? I think you can do the same one as that, right? You come around, you can take a look, have them move around. You don't need to be answering that question for them. My mother-in-law is Korean. Are there other Koreans nearby? So these are the interesting ones where, as a realtor, I don't necessarily feel this person's a horrible person. I don't feel, in fact, I probably feel some kind of obligation to try to help them out with that question, right? Are there any other Koreans nearby? The one downside though, as a realtor, is if we start showing all the Koreans all one area, then we're steering, we're putting, and all of a sudden we have a society where all the Koreans live in one spot. So how do we handle that?
I think you still go back to the same answer Will gave.
Yeah.
Drive around and look.
Yeah.
Can you just
Go ahead.
say, I don't know? I don't have any idea what the ethnic dispersion is, but that, we don't discriminate.
I think it's always perfectly appropriate to say, we don't know, we don't discriminate. But I guess my one caveat to you is, as a realtor, if you say, I don't know too much and don't show any interest in finding out, people will think you're not doing your job, right? So I think a lot of these questions you're going to have to figure out how to pivot to the things you can answer, or to try to at least address as best as possible, but not get into the discrimination area. So in this one, rather than answering are there any other Koreans nearby, maybe you do have, here are some clubhouses, or here are some neighborhood activities that aren't specific to a certain national origin, but some other things you can pivot to that would help address at least the ability to interact with others.
Well, like in Lexington, I can say I've seen signs that have Korean language on them in front of churches. Does that?
Yeah, but even there, I think my advice to you is to not get into that question. You do not want to be, you don't want to be directing people to certain property based on their national origin. You can provide them with, websites or other things where they can find out and do that on their own. But you don't want to be aiding them in steering towards certain places.
Okay.
Just like, even if somebody did come in and say, in Lexington, where do all the Hispanics live? If I'm a realtor, I don't think I say, well, they all live in Cardinal Valley, let's all go look over there. I think I would avoid that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What I've done with people is show them houses all over town, or send them listings of houses all over town, and then let them tell me what they're most interested in.
Absolutely. And if they are choosing to discriminate, that's okay, right? Like you will find in this business, white people often will not want to live in places that aren't predominantly white or predominantly black. I mean, that aren't predominantly white. You'll find that they avoid other places often. It is just a cultural thing that a lot of people will do, but you don't want to be aiding or insinuating that they should do that, or helping them out in that endeavor, right? What we want to be doing is we want to be showing open housing, and if it fits what they're looking for, we'll show it to them. And if they want to make some discriminatory choice, they can do that on their own. Does that make sense? What if they say this isn't a gay district? Is it? How do we answer that one?
I'm probably going to tell them they look pretty happy to me.
Yeah, and I think here's one of the things I will tell people is that when you're forming these relationships, or I will just use my own example of my own wife, is that like sometimes my wife will say things I don't always completely agree with, but discretion being the better part of valor, I will sometimes just nod quietly just to not pick fights. And as a you might be a realtor who has a big who's a big UK fan who you're trying to show around, and you're a big UK fan, and you might not want to get into those differences or talk politics or talk religion, right? But we've got to be careful that we don't kind of inherently go along with discriminatory statements. You can't just go around nodding. And I'll use the next example. If somebody does use the N-word around you, figuring out how you're going to deal with something like that. And I will tell you, all realtors should have in their head what their line is already decided before they enter these types of situations. You should know, what is the limit I will take with the client? When will I fire them? When will I try to redirect them? So if somebody uses the N-word around you, what are you going to do in that situation?
I'm going to tell them I do not appreciate that word. And if they continue to think like that, I don't think I'm the realtor for them.
I think that's an appropriate answer. Yeah. Then I throw this last one in here just to kind of illustrate the last point here about the importance for a realtor to keep your personal life separate from your professional life. But they ask you, would you like to go out with me sometime? One of the difficulty things for a realtor is that you usually maintain a close set of personal networks. And in fair housing law, some of the things that can get you in trouble is when you blur your personal life and your professional life. So if you happen to have a bunch of friends and the friends call you to show them a house, and they want to talk about it at 8 o'clock on Friday, and you're answering that call, but you're not answering the call from the Hispanic grandma who calls you at 8 o'clock, it gets a little blurry about why you're treating different people different. So you kind of always want to know, this is me in my professional life, this is me in my personal life. And just as we're going through a little tricks of the trade and tidbits, I will give you the one other piece of advice that I give to realtors all the time, and that is to always remember that every person you're dealing with carries a recording device with them at all times. I'm going to say that one more time. Everybody you're working with carries a recording device with them at all times. And the situations that you're going through where it might seem like casual banter or just friendly chit chat can look a lot different in a court transcript. So just being careful with the things you say. People who you seem to get along with can still try to bite you in the butt and use stuff against you later. So we talk about all that, and I'm trying to tie all this into where we are now and where we move from here. But looking at the home ownership rates in Louisville, Kentucky, white home ownership rates 70.8, African-American home ownership rates 36.1, Latinx 36. There is a clear, sizable difference between that. A lot of it is socioeconomic, and a lot of the socioeconomic stuff comes from the legacy stuff we had before. One of the things we know is you're much more likely to own a home if your parents owned a home and if your parents' parents owned a home. And if we systemically prevented parents from owning a home, that's going to continue to have an impact on you. And we know that there is some specific things that we've talked about already today that go toward why those differences are what they are, which then kind of leads us to the question of how do you fix it? Because that's the thing that's, I think, incredibly difficult. And as we think through this mental exercise, I'll start with this example from the new Albany Housing Authority, which is right across the river from Louisville. And I was meeting with the executive director there who had taken over work on that property. And by the time he had taken over it, there were still, from the past, 2 buildings. One's considered the white building and one's not only considered, but called the white building, and one's called the black building. One has predominantly almost all white people living in it. One had almost all black people living in it, because that's how historically it had always happened. Based back in the past from when they actually were segregated intentionally. Now, how does he fix it? How does the new executive director fix the fact that he has 2 buildings? One is all black, one is all white. The people, so much so that the people actually refer to them still as the black building, white building. So he stopped referring to them. He doesn't refer them to them that way, right? Like he won't let other people refer to them that way. But if a white individual comes up for the black building, they just turn it down. How does he fix it? Give me some thoughts. Anybody?
I would show people of all different races, both buildings.
Right. And he's doing that.
Yeah. So, but they get to choose.
Right.
That's the bottom line is as a realtor.
So, right. So I'm with you there, but is that really that's what he's doing. And that's, within the bounds of the law, he's showing on the property. But if I'm a black individual and I come in and I see one building's all black and one building's all white, does it make sense for me to feel like I am equally welcome in both buildings? Probably not. I probably do not feel equally welcome in both buildings.
Well, how would you make someone feel welcome if they don't feel welcome?
Right. But again, the reason the individual doesn't feel welcome in that building is because we have historically made it so they are not welcome in that building, right? We, by law and through policy, said only blacks could live in one building and only whites could live in the other building, till we built it to such a point that it was already such a mass crux of numbers that people didn't feel comfortable. So I'll give you another example.
Well, I have an idea. I would incentivize people of different races or whatever to go into the other building that they think is predominantly not their race, either through less rent or some kind of a bonus or something like that, to where they still have the option, they still have the choice, and they may decide that they want to go for it.
So yeah, and I think you're thinking about different ways, but under your idea would technically be illegal under fair housing law, right? You could not, and under fair housing law, incentivize somebody based on their skin color to go to a different place. Because basically, we had discriminatory laws in place for a long, long time until they built up such a system where you didn't need them anymore. And at this point, we can't use discriminatory laws to fix anything. So there's no way easily to fix the pattern of discrimination that we put in place from the past.
You could still gift people. That's discretionary. You could do what you want with that.
I could not choose to incentivize white people differently than black people under fair housing law currently. And so, I'll expand this a little bit further. The city of Westchester, New York gets millions and millions and millions of dollars from HUD every year. Westchester is a relatively wealthy area of New York. And as they got their millions and millions and millions of dollars to build affordable housing, where do you think the rich people of Westchester decided to build their affordable housing? Did they build it in the nice, semi-wealthy white areas, or did they put their affordable housing in the mostly lower income, predominantly African-American areas? They put it in the predominantly African-American areas, and they got sued by HUD because they have what's this obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, which they weren't doing. But the point here is that when you get money to build affordable housing, if all you do is continue to build it in the kind of the red areas that we had seen in Louisville, where the blue areas, if you build it in those blue, predominantly African-American areas, because that's where it's cheaper, not only are you not fixing the past legacy of discrimination that we talked about, you are actually adding to it. You're making things worse, right? You are continuing the effects and emboldening the discrimination that happened in the past. Now, again, I don't have easy answers to that. I don't know how to tell you what to do about that, right? I've been thinking, there are no one easy answer. In Lexington, Kentucky, for example, you get the city has $2 million every year that they set aside for affordable housing. We know in Lexington, like in Louisville, there is a desperate need for more affordable housing. But the fact of the matter is, if you took that $2 million, you could probably build, let's say, 20 units in the Cardinal Valley area that she was talking about earlier, that's predominantly Hispanic. You could probably build 20 units, or you could probably build one unit, one home next to John Calipari's house. We know there's more need for affordable housing. So in some ways, you need to build wherever you can build the most units. But we also know that if we just keep building affordable housing in the areas that have already been disproportionately impacted by segregation in the past, you will continue those effects later on in the future. I don't really know the answer, except I think when we think about putting in affordable housing, when we think about where people should live, we think about the things that we talked about at the very beginning, which is you should still think about price, but you also should think about safety. You should think about schools. You should think about economics next to businesses, next to transportation. You should consider holistically all those things as we're trying to figure out where people should live moving forward. I will say, so that's, again, I don't have easy answers for where we are. And I don't have an explanation, I can't sit here and tell you if you do this, this fixes it. We're in pretty far deep. The idea of basically what happened in America is we had a whole class of people who've been playing that Monopoly game for 10 to 15 rounds. And then when we finally let some other people in and said, well, you all can start playing, we're surprised, after all the property's already been bought, the home's already been bought. And then we say, well, the rules are fair moving forward. And we're, think that that's a level playing field, and it's not. So that's mostly covers mine. Curtis, did other people have questions, things they want to bring up?
Okay, Jeff, I'll let Jeff hop in here. You around, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Curtis, are we opening for questions? Are we opening for questions now?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, are we opening for questions now? Or did you want to wait until everyone's spoken?
We'll take a few questions now, since I think we have a few minutes available, don't we?
Okay, all right, perfect. I know we had one question in the chat about the recording of this. And first of all, let me say that this was some powerful information. I know I'm taking notes as well. And, so Art, I want to say thank you for that. We do have a recording that will be made available. So to answer that question, but what we'll do right now is, are there any questions that we have right now? We'll open up for those at this time.
I have one question. Did the gentleman in New Albany find an answer to that situation?
Not that I know of. I think
Okay.
he's in the same situation all of us are, which is struggling to figure out how you fix the things that we did wrong in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Jeff, I have a quick question, if that's okay. How do you, Art, as you kind of study this and work with other states, other organizations, other cities, does Kentucky or the urban areas here, or even just statewide, how do we compare? How do our issues regarding fair housing compare to others? Are we unique? Does everybody kind of see the same issues? I mean, in general, do we struggle with certain things more than others?
No, I don't think we're unique. And I'll talk urban versus rural is a very big distinction, right? So let me go over that real quick. I think the thing we're seeing urban, Louisville, Lexington, most big cities, the big issue we're seeing now is kind of the idea of what people will call gentrification, but the idea of you come in and we do take areas that might be heavily minority concentration or areas of where housing conditions aren't great, and we'll come in and try to fix them up, which, look, from a fair housing perspective, gentrification is not necessarily a bad word to us. The idea of people coming in and adding investment to a community is not in and of itself the problem. The problem that comes is the involuntary displacement, or just the displacement in general. And when you're looking at places like Lexington and Louisville, when individuals get displaced from those areas, they're not just getting displaced from that one area of Louisville or Lexington, they're getting displaced from the city as a whole, right? The ability for people to remain in their community or to remain in their city, period, becomes a very big difficulty. And I think that kind of gentrification error is a problem. Every big city I've seen, I have not seen any place that has a great answer in terms of how can we help communities, how can we help invest in communities, how can we help diversify communities, but do it in a way that doesn't displace the people in living there. I'll put a pause on that one to go to the fact of the rural, because rural, one of the examples for rural historical stuff, right? It doesn't play out exactly like Lexington or Louisville, but even like the city of Berea. City of Berea was a place that had really progressive at the time. They had an integrated college. They had this idea in Berea that they were going to have checkerboard housing, black, white, black, white. But what happened is the state came in and actually they passed a criminal law against Berea for having the integrated college, sued them and found them guilty in a criminal court of law for having the integrated college. All of the Berea's plans about integrating the community went up in smoke. Berea lost a huge segment of African-American population they just will never get back. And if you're looking at that throughout rural areas or smaller towns in Kentucky, how those historical ideas of not having African-Americans welcome during certain areas, I don't know how you rectify that either. But I think the challenges facing urban areas are very distinct from those facing the rural areas.
All right, good stuff. Well, Art, I do say thank you for being with us this afternoon and sharing, some powerful information. I didn't know a lot of that, and I think it's very important that we pass this down, to future generations, not just for our family, but for folks in the industry, in the real estate industry, so we don't repeat the same mistakes and really improve upon what we've had. And we're going to go ahead and transition to our next speaker. We have the privilege and honor of hearing from a gentleman who's the owner of Alston and Associates Mortgage Company and Skyway Realty. He's also the current chairman of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers Public Affairs Committee. This gentleman has served as the vice president of the California Association of Real Estate Brokers, president of the Consolidated Board of Realtors of LA, and as chairman of the Mortgage Banking Committee for the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Mr. Mark Alston. Mr. Alston, did you make it to the line this afternoon?
You know, I'm very happy to be participating in this event today. And I really want to say how much I appreciated Mr. Crosby's presentation. I really appreciate it. I think that you'll find that some of the same information is in the presentation I'm about to give. The difference may be perspective. I'm going to do a presentation that NAREB conducts a report, issues a report, a comprehensive report of the state of housing in Black America every year, and we have done so since 2013. Those reports are available on our website, www.nareb.com, from 2013 through this year's report, and we're currently working on next year's report. We usually roll it out at the Congressional Black Caucus. It's a policy report that talks about the state of housing. In order to understand the state of housing, you've got to have some history and some context, which we heard in the last presentation. As you'll see, I was amazed at that presentation because it flowed somewhat like my presentation. I was in Louisville 3 years ago, in June 30th, 2018. I love your city. I was treated very well, and I'm very, very happy to be presenting there. I wish that I could be there. The State of Housing in Black America, Louisville edition, challenges and solutions. There are challenges and there are solutions. There are solutions that we want to propose at the end of this presentation. You'll see in this banner, it says if the racial wealth divide is left unaddressed, median Black household wealth is on a path to hit zero by 2053. Now, diversity is a word that we talk about a lot lately. I tend to tell people in this presentation, I am not being diverse. I am talking from the position of Black Americans. I'm speaking not to disparage any other race, but I want to speak from that which we are, that which we come from. National Association of Realtors, of Real Estate Brokers was organized out of a need in 1947. There were housing riots. There was a group of Black men and women who had come back from fighting in World War II and found themselves unable to find housing. And we were not allowed to become part of the National Association of Realtors at the time. So we formed the National Association of Real Estate Brokers and coined the term realtist. I'm a member of the National Association of Realtors and have been since 1989 or 90, but I've also been a member of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers since 1989. And I choose to identify as a realtist because it represents the community that I live and work in. Realtors are the watchmen for their community, and our motto is democracy in housing. This is the Black home ownership rate nationally, 44.1%. This is the Black home ownership, white home ownership rate nationally, 74.5%. This is the US Census, fourth quarter 2020. We're looking for the first quarter 2021, but it won't be out for another 20 days or so. The gap between the two is 30.4%. I found it interesting. I think that the gap in Louisville is 33.9%, a little higher than the national average in terms of the gap between Black and white home ownership. In 1900, when discrimination was legal, the gap between Black and white home ownership was at 27.6%. And at the signing of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, the Black home ownership rate stood at 42%, about where it is now. and with white home ownership at 63.9%. In the 53 years since, white home ownership has increased to 74.5%, while Black home ownership has basically remained the same, and the gap has increased. It's my contention that this is intentional. I found it amazing that Mr. Crosby had a slide that said he felt like this was intentional. And the reasons for that feeling that it's intentional are exclusionary zoning, active opposition to Black home ownership, not random chance, not it just went that way, but active opposition that was targeted to decrease or prohibit Black home ownership. Exclusionary zoning, private covenants, U.S. government redlining, predatory housing contracts, eminent domain, and racially disparate housing finance policies that we find today. Public policy and tradition, public policy, law, ordinances, state, local, county, and federal public policy and tradition, how we do things, have served to block access and severely restrict Black home ownership opportunity. Again, we talked about in the previous presentation, racially exclusive zoning. You guys are very familiar with and have played an important part in the history of eliminating racially exclusive zoning. The corner of 37th and Palance in Louisville, where that transaction between Buchanan and Wardley took place. Again, this was made unenforceable, illegal by the Supreme Court in 1917. This happened throughout the country. I had the opportunity to participate, present the historical context for Evanston, Illinois, restorative justice reparations program that's providing down payment assistance to Black prospective home buyers in Evanston based on the racially exclusive zoning and other discrimination practices that almost eliminated the opportunity for Blacks to buy housing in the early 1900s. Next, we had private covenants, also discussed previously. St. Louis, Missouri was where the court case came about, private covenants. When a landowner sold to a developer, he would put into the contract that once developed, when the house was built, this property could not be sold to a Black family. A Black family could only be in the neighborhood as a handyman or a servant, and generally had to be out unless they were live-in by 6 o'clock. We saw some of those sundown rules and that are sundown laws that we've seen in various cities around the country, made unenforceable by Supreme Court decision in the Shelley versus Kramer case, May 3rd, 1948. Then, of course, we had the government redlining, government-sanctioned redlining. The Federal Housing Administration institutionalized racism in housing. Coming out of the Depression, mortgage liquidity was at an all-time low. And the government, our US president, through the New Deal, recognizing that white home ownership was down to 50%, wanted to increase mortgage liquidity and came up with a brand new federal program, FHA. White home ownership was down to 50% and it was a national tragedy. Black home ownership has never been 50%. The highest our home ownership rate has ever been is 49.1% in 2004, prior to the real estate bubble and subsequent recession. You've seen this map, the redlining map. This is Louisville, Kentucky's redlining map. Green for brand new subdivision, all white. Blue for existing housing, all white. Yellow for mixed neighborhoods, and red for neighborhoods that Blacks lived in. Green, all white. Blue, all white. Yellow, mixed, and red predominantly. What was the difference? In green and blue, with FHA and this new financing, you could get an 85% loan to value loan with 15% down. In the yellow area, you could get a 15% loan to value loan with 85% down. In the red area, there was no lending available. This is a piece of the appraisal that would be part of that that was done to value the properties. And you can see the center section is blue and the far right section on my screen is yellow. Security grade second and security grade third. If you look down, it says Negroes, yes or no. In the blue section, it's no. In the yellow section, it's yes. And how many Negroes lived in the yellow section to make it yellow? 1%. 1%. And that made, in the blue at the bottom, mortgage availability ample, and mortgage availability in the yellow is limited. That means there were very few sales or financing done. And when they were done, it was with 85% down. Because of the unavailability of financing through the finance agencies of the day, Blacks resorted to private contracts, buying properties directly from the owner and using a land contract to execute the trust agreement, the collateral agreement. So what would happen is they generally bought the property for more than market, generally average 22% more than the market value. The land contract did not transfer title. So if there were any financial bumps in the road, the person buying the house, after putting a down payment down and paying these mortgage payments, would be evicted just like a regular tenant. The property could be resold again and the process start all over again. In Chicago, in the Bronze Belt of Chicago, it is suspected that several $billion in Black wealth was stripped just through these private contracts in the 40s and 50s. Eminent domain. Eminent domain, obviously, when land is needed for the public good. The 1949 Housing Act and the 1956 Interstate Highway Act decimated Black neighborhoods through urban renewal. There was a move to eliminate blight, and Black houses were torn down, and in most cases, freeways ran through the center of what was Black neighborhoods. In Miami, they destroyed a vibrant Black neighborhood. In Los Angeles, where I live at, the 110 freeway cut through Black neighborhoods. The 10 freeway separated the lower class Black neighborhoods and business section from other sections and destroyed that. The other thing that happened was there would be no exits or entrances into certain cities. There's towns in Florida that the cities were decimated, Black majority towns that the cities were decimated when they put in the highway system because there was no ingress or egress to those neighborhoods and to those business areas. And then, of course, we have the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Mr. Crosby did a great job of talking about it. I want to add a little bit more context to this Fair Housing Act of 1968. It's actually Title 8 of the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. Fair housing is just one title to this bill that was passed, the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. Title I of this act prohibits interference with federal troops. We got to remember what was happening in 1968. There was a lot going on in America. Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their hands in protest at the Olympics and destroyed their careers. Man landed on the moon in 1968. James Brown came out with, as a result of the riots happening because of the assassination of Martin Luther King on April 4th, James Brown came out with Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud in 1968. And of course, on April 11th, this Fair Housing Act, which was failing, had not been able to get through the Senate, was failing, but because of the number of riots and insurrection in the United States going on based on the discrimination and the killing of Martin Luther King, this act now was passed. It's interesting, if you look up civil rights, just civil rights in the United States, it'll either say 1947 to 1968 or 1955 to 1968. But in all cases, it seems like the civil rights movement in America ended in 1968 with the passing of the Fair Housing Act. Title I, again, prohibits interference with federal troops. Titles 2 through 7 deal with Indian civil rights. Title 8 is our Fair Housing Act that we lean on. Title 9 is the prevention of intimidation in fair housing cases, which is extremely important and was at the time. Gave you the opportunity to come forward, hopefully without being harassed. Then Title 10 was civil obedience. This was the compromise. This made it a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison for in any way obstruct, impede, delay, or adversely affect the movement of police, firemen, or commerce. What this did was criminalize the protest. That if you were blocking the streets, it was possible to go to the penitentiary, to be arrested and go to the penitentiary for up to 5 years. Then there was a rider attached to the bill called the H. Rap Brown rider that made it a felony to travel from state to state with the intent to incite, promote, encourage, or participate in or carry out a riot. At that time, there was a lot of organizations, be it the NAACP, the Urban League, the Southern Leadership Conference, that would send their leadership from city to city to help organize the civil disobedience and the protest. And the difference between a protest and a riot generally was what the police said it was. So you became, again, eligible to go to the penitentiary for leaving your state to go to another state to help participate in bringing about some civil rights. And then there was the Omnibus Crime Bill and Safe Streets Act that came a little bit later. This was the beginning of the militarization of our urban police forces. $50 million were earmarked to local law enforcement agencies to deal with riot control. That's when you started to see them buying military type vehicles to control urban environments. It shall be unlawful to refuse to sell to or rent after the making of a bona fide offer, or to refuse to negotiate for the sale or rental of, or otherwise make unavailable or deny a dwelling to any person because of race, religion, sex, familial status, or national origin. That's the core content of Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. That's the core context, was to make it unlawful to discriminate based on race in housing. The Urban Institute, the Economic Policy Institute, on February 26th, at the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, issued a report that said there's been no progress for Blacks on home ownership, unemployment, and/or incarceration in 50 years. Then today's situation, disparate housing finance policies. What do I mean by that? Well, in America, average income, this is 2019, most recent numbers I can find, I suspect we'll get 2020 numbers shortly. Asians are the highest earning ethnicity at $91,414. Whites, second at $70,727. Hispanics at $51,747 a year, and Blacks at $43,966. In America, the average Black family's net wealth is $3,600. The average white family's net wealth is $147,000. That's 40 times the wealth. It said that Blacks typically have a dime for every dollar that white people have. The average FICO score, Asian 745, white 734, Hispanic 701, Black 677. It's interesting that the FICO scores follow the income, follow the wealth. I think it can be easily understood that when you make less and you have an emergency, that the bills have to be done based on fixing the car or repairing something that needs to be repaired to continue being able to matriculate through your daily activities. And so the FICO scores tend to reflect that reality. Well, when you design a housing finance system that penalizes or charges more for acceptable credit, but that's lower, for lesser down payments, and a system where the income, wealth, and FICO scores are historically disparate in America, you've designed a racially disparate housing finance system, whether you meant it to be or not. What do I mean by that? Prior to April 2008, if you were approved for a mortgage with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, floor being 620 FICO score, then all pricing and interest rates were available to you. They were all the same if you were approved. Well, April 2008, when the Housing and Economic Recovery Act bill was passed, they instituted risk-based pricing. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were in trouble. We agree that they were in trouble. The American taxpayer to date had loaned them $191 billion. And so they instituted this loan level price adjustments, risk-based pricing, additional fees to make up the difference. Well, Fannie Mae, several years ago now, has not only paid back the $191 billion, Fannie and Freddie, not only paid back the $191 billion, but they've added an additional $103, $104, $105 billion in profit that has been swept through what's called a treasury sweep into the general budget, and not one dime has gone toward any housing activity. What do I mean? If you look at this chart, this is the chart for loan level price adjustments, just one of them. This shows the adjustment to the cost of the mortgage based on FICO score. So the average Black FICO score, 674 down there in the green, you add 2.25% to the cost of the mortgage, the average with 5% down. The average white FICO score, 734, in the yellow, you add 0.5%. The difference is 1.75%. In the mortgage business, I own a mortgage company, we offset this cost. If you're putting 5% down, you probably don't have additional money. So we offset this cost with interest rate. But how it looks on a $250,000 home for a white person is your mortgage cost is $1,250. How it looks on a $250,000 home for a Black person, your mortgage cost is $5,625, or a difference in pricing for the same loan with no evidence of performance differences of those FICO scores, $4,375. And what really happens is you might have gotten, the white person generally will have the 734 borrower will generally have an interest rate today of 2.75, 2.875, while that same Black borrower with a little lower FICO score, same down payment, same credit style, will have an interest rate of maybe 3.25, 3.5. They'll have a higher mortgage payment for the entirety, for the life of the loan. The reality is, up to this point, fair housing just ain't fair. What do I mean by that? When you've had 246 years of slavery, 103 years of Jim Crow, legalized discrimination, and then 53 years of equal treatment. You know, a good head start, you got a 349-year head start, beats fast running. No matter what I do at this point, and I think the previous speaker spoke to this, that now you make it all equal, but the head start is so far ahead that I can't catch you. I can't get it equal no matter what I do. Maintenance of status quo, that's what's happening. We have a 30% gap. The gap has been 30% the entire time of this fair housing season. What we actually need, well, let me go into some current statistics for mortgage production. In the United States, this is HMDA data as reported by the lending institutions in America. In the United States, there were 9,325,241 new mortgages in the last HMDA data year. Whites were 6,012,506. Hispanics, 890,260. Blacks, 516,405. Asians, 499,980. I use the four major ethnic groups. The Black approval rate is 48.53%. White approval rate's a little over 65% nationally. The denial rate for Black applicants is 27.04%, and for white applicants, 15.16%. When your approval rate for the entirety of Black folks in America is below 50%, what it does is it affects the consciousness of the community. In the community, everybody knows that you've applied for a loan for a house, but you were denied. Nobody wants to be denied. You're working, you're making money, you're saving money, and so you want to show some success. But when that collective consciousness has this denial shadow over it, what happens is you quit trying and you go buy a depreciating asset like a car to show your success, as opposed to an appreciating asset like real property that has succession and generational wealth attached to it. A little closer to home in Kentucky. Kentucky's population, a little under 5 million. This is July 1st, 2019 population data. It might be slightly different, but the most recent that I can find, I use the US Census for population data. Total population, 4,467,463 in your state. Kentucky is 84% white, 84.1% white, and 8.5% Black. Hispanic 3.9%, and Asian 1.6%. The mortgage production in Kentucky, total mortgages 113,885. White 92,381, Blacks 4,362, Hispanics 2,953, and Asians 1,821. The Black approval rate is actually higher than the national average in the state of Kentucky at 55.40%. White approval rate is 64.16%. The Black denial rate and the gap between the Black denial rate and the white denial rate in Kentucky is one of the best I've seen in the country. Black denial rate is 22.81% as compared to 16.74% white denial rate. It took 8,191 Black applications to achieve 4,362 new Black mortgages, and bringing it close to home, the Louisville, Jefferson County balance, total population 617,638. Whites are 65%, 65.5%. Blacks are 23.6%. This is a more urban area, and we find a higher concentration of Blacks in the urban area. Hispanics 5.6%, Asians 2.7%. Mortgage production, total mortgages 24,862, white 17,741, Blacks 2,157, Hispanics 1,188, Asians 702. The Black approval rate's a little lower, 53.83%. The white loan approval is 67.72%. That's a little higher. Black denial rate's 23.51%. It's higher, almost twice that of white borrowers. Denial rate of 12.70%. It took 4,175 Black family applications to achieve 2,157 new mortgages. Blacks are 23% of the population, 23.6%, but only received 8.6% of the new mortgages. This is not unusual. This is typical. Kentucky's not any different. This is what we find across the country. And actually, the higher the percentage of Caucasians to Blacks, the better the approval rate, and the lower the denial rate, the higher the percentage of Blacks. As you notice, from the state of Kentucky to the Louisville area, the Black approval rate went down and the Black denial rate went up. That's pretty typical. When it's a Black majority, it's even more differences in what we see. What do these statistics tell us? What does this say to us? Today's housing realities, what we see now are really the reflection of yesterday's unfair housing policy. On November 19th, 2020, the new NAREB president, Charlie Oppler, issued a formal apology for the association's past policies that contributed to segregation and racial inequality in America. His statement was, quote, "We can't go back and fix the mistakes of the past, but we can look the problem squarely in the eye. What realtors did was shameful, and we are sorry." I want to differ with this statement. We can't go back and fix the mistakes of the past. I think we can go back and fix the mistakes in the past. NAR, the National Association of Realtors, history has been one of opposition to the fair housing laws, to civil rights laws, to equal treatment laws, to fees that would be designated to go to urban housing areas. I think we can go back and fix the mistakes of the past by joining together in advocating for positive, affirmative, assertive programs and initiatives targeted to increase Black home ownership. This screen originally said designed to increase Black home ownership, but I realized that there was active opposition to Black home ownership. That Blacks were targeted to not be homeowners. And if we're ever going to level this playing field, to narrow this gap that represents wealth and well-being of American families, then we're going to have some targeted initiatives that offset, that increase, that serve to improve Black home ownership. We can advocate and support these type positions together. NAR, NAREB, AREA, all of us can join together in this advocacy and be on the right side of righting past wrongs. We can fix the past. What are the ideas that NAREB has? What are we advocating for? A national restorative justice housing fund. What do I mean by that? A down payment assistance fund that would be available to Black Americans, the biggest inhibitor to home ownership, one of the largest inhibitor to home ownership for low-hanging fruit, for people who have jobs, who have acceptable credit in the Black community is the down payment. We're paying high rents in America, aggregated across all ethnicities. The average homeowner is worth $200,000 and the average renter is worth $5,000, and that figure is decreasing as time goes by. In this time in America where we're seeing trillions of dollars being appropriated for a variety of things, including social issues, housing and access to the American dream in America is something I think that we can all aspire to and support. In Evanston, while we were doing this reparations program, and reparations seems to be one of those words like affirmative action, it's a bad word in every community. You can call it restitution or redress. But I found it interesting that those who already have, even in the Black community, especially in the Black community, were in opposition to a fund that would benefit those who don't have and haven't had access to. There's some healing that needs to be done across all of this, across all ethnic makeup. But I think that America is only as strong as its weakest link, as its poorest person. And we've got to find a way to reach back and remember that while we may be doing well, we live in a community, and the well-being of that community is also our well-being. And just by the grace of God, it's me here and not there. The second thing that NAREB is advocating to narrow this gap is to reform the school loan calculation for mortgage qualifying. 87% or more of Black students have federal school loans in order to matriculate through college. We tell them you need to get a good job. You get a good job, you need to have a higher degree. You need more education. But then the education is outside of the economic ability of the family to send them. So our students are saddled with student debt above other ethnicities. It's said that Black students, Black young people are 10 years behind based on this debt and their ability to buy their first home of their white peers. It used to be that if you had a 2-year deferment in your school loans, that for mortgage financing, we did not have to count that payment against you in your qualifying. That has changed and become more restrictive. Now the requirement is still a 2-year deferment, but you can only get a 1-year deferment from the school loans, and they require us, for the most case, to count 1% of your balance as a payment. So if your school loans are $60,000, $70,000, then that's a $700 payment that goes against your debt to income ratio, and you don't qualify. We want to get back to when America was underwriting loans as an optimistic country that understood that if you got out of school and you wanted to buy a house, and we deferred those payments and didn't include them in the debt to income ratio, that your income and your ability to get a job would be there and it would grow, as opposed to the pessimistic way we're underwriting today that says that we need to pay attention because we don't want you to default based on these school loans, and maybe you won't get a job and maybe you won't do well. The last thing is to eliminate loan level price adjustments, what I call the poor pay more fee adjustment. The reality is there was no loan level price adjustment prior to 2008. Not only are they not eliminating them, but they're increasing them. For any of you guys who refinanced in the last 3, 4, 5 months, you realize that they added a 0.5% fee, loan level price adjustment to every refinance to raise more funds, because they just added a 0.5% fee as a loan level price adjustment. Now they're talking about adding a 10 basis point fee. These fees make loans less affordable to those who are least qualified, and in effect have the least qualified people subsidizing the more qualified access to Fannie and Freddie's pricing. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were created to provide mortgage liquidity to low and middle class Americans, to give them access to the American dream, including providing lower than market rate interest rates and products that did not match up to Wall Street's type profits. Fannie has gotten away from their mission and gotten into some other profit type mission and providing incentives to Wall Street, looking for a public-private partnership. Wall Street is fee incentive. Loan level price adjustments are additional fees, profit that are being made on the backs of those who could least afford it. Maintenance of status quo is the overwhelming social construct. The laws that we have had, the policies that we have had, the current policies that we do have served to maintain this gap of 30% for the last 53 years. Nothing has changed. My goal, our goal at the National Association of Real Estate Brokers is to educate, to get this historical context in place, to understand that it didn't just happen. It's not by accident. It's not random. It was active opposition to home ownership for Blacks and other ethnic minorities. This education should then motivate us as communities, no matter what our ethnicity. And with the education and the motivation, it gives us the opportunity to advocate for that which would make America a better and more fair place to live. I'll leave you with this. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. You know, I was listening to the prior presentation and the questions about what do you say if? You know, what if somebody says the N-word? I can tell you from a Black perspective, when one of my friends that look like me say something that's inappropriate racially, I let them know that that was a racist thing to say. How can victims of oppression turn around and be oppressors? Let's not do that. We've got to learn how I can't fix your neighborhood. I can work on mine. We've got to take stands. We've got to learn to be courageous. We've got to have intestinal fortitude. Being in real estate, being in this space gives you the opportunity to change family lives. You get the opportunity, the sense of gratification when you put somebody in a house, when you give them the keys and you recognize that you just improved that family life, especially our first-time home buyers. Let's not be quiet anymore. Let's go on and say the things that we need to say. thank you for allowing me to present this to you.
All right, Mark, we appreciate you. That was incredible. I definitely want to say thank you for hopping on with us this afternoon and sharing those nuggets. I know I was taking those. Matter of fact, I have a question. I was jotting so many notes. I think it was the average Black FICO score, I think you mentioned, was 674. I was writing. What did you say right before that contributed to that?
Oh, again, that's the average Black family makes $60.01 for every $100 that the average white family makes. When you have less income and disparities in pay across ethnicities and genders, when you have lack of historic wealth, lack of wealth, generational wealth, then today's economic realities may be that you have to repair a car, or that you have to pay tuition, or that you have to do different things that has an impact on your FICO score, that has an impact. You may have to make a family economic executive decision to fix your car and hold off on a payment. Unbanking, non-banked people, payday loans, all types of things that don't report positive on your credit that Blacks and other unbanked people do, but then report negative if you get behind in them. So there's a lot of reasons for lower FICO scores in communities that have less wealth. If you notice, the FICO scores follow the average incomes. Absolutely.
I appreciate that. We're going to open it up for any other questions that anyone would like to ask Mark. The floor is open. All right, they're in the chat, Mark. They're saying great job, great presentation. Absolutely, and I appreciate you for all the not just presenting the problem, but presenting some solutions. It says the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I think it was Evan Burke that said that, and we appreciate you for bringing, as a good man, bringing that to light. All that wisdom with us here on the line this afternoon, and especially those solutions. And I'm excited for what's going to be to come, because everyone here on this line that was impacted, by those solutions, and we can go out here into the marketplace in our communities and begin to make that impact. So I'm going to open up one more time. If anyone has any questions, either in the chat or you can speak up.
I have a question. Do you have any data on Black families and how many heads of households are single parent? Because I think some of the disparity that I'm seeing is, no two-income families, not many two-income families in the Black community. And I think that there's no cushion there. The FICO score is typically based on if you pay your bills on time and what your credit is versus what your payment is. And I do understand, people have basic needs that have to be handled, but if there's only one person working, like a single parent, that adversely affects your ability to have that cushion and be able to afford more. So do you have any stats on family?
I do. I do. What's your name?
Diana.
Diana, thank you for asking that question. So a lot of times when I do this, I spoke to a group of recent college graduates from HBCUs, 3,500 or so. And in that presentation, I dealt with that in general. 72% of Black children are born to unwed mothers. I think the figure for marriage is 41% for Blacks and 72, 73, 74% for whites. we have tragedy and we have tragedy in that regard in our families, in our neighborhoods, and that's been supported. And it's been, you know, in certain public housing situations, if there's a man in the house, the availability for rent subsidies was not there, and it split up families. Our women are hired and our men are not. I've got a lot of statistics in that area. Right now, you know, I live in an area where the average price, the median price in my county is 620,000, and in my city is 800 and some thousand. And it requires two incomes in order to buy. In my business, I'm a mortgage company. I have a plethora of single Black females who buy, and no single Black men generally. It's not because they don't want to. It's our women are working, and our men typically have less employment, or either entrepreneurial. And so we find that the data in our neighborhoods are that women are buyers. And of course, the inequity in pay across ethnicities is one thing. And then there's an additional inequity across gender. And so the affordability is lower. You're on something that is a fight in the neighborhood, a fight in the family that I represent. To one of the things that I do is, and I'm just going to be straightforward, I don't know how else to be, is I put a call out to Black men to marry your women and raise your children. You know, we got to put our families back together. We got to not allow ourselves to be selfish in our lives, that we're selfish and we just think about what's best for me and how can I best live my best life. We got to get back to dedicating our lives to our families. That's just a call that has to be put out. I think we've gotten off track there. I say that with a heavy heart, actually. I don't like having to say it, but I can't not represent what I believe to be the truth.
Mr. Alston, I appreciate you sharing this. I would like to know how we as realtors and those of us that are white, how can we help strengthen the Black family and encourage your community to, I guess, have more marriage and support their children better? I mean, the stuff I see is heartbreaking. Okay, when
Yes.
I see lives that are in ruin, and it comes across the TV every day of needless struggle and turmoil with people. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And
You know, I
just
hear your heart.
wonder
I hear your heart.
how can we, I mean, this is the root problem, okay? It's love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to know, what can we do? Frankly, I don't think money's going to fix it. I think it's got to be relational. We have got to bridge that gap and have friends of whatever color, okay, and be with people. It's kind of like, you know, I'm an older adult and I am still mentoring my 40-something children. And that's just part of life. We have to reach into people's lives and share whatever gifts or skills that we have. And in this case, you're right. Home is the basic. It's a foundational thing. And so we can provide that, but we need to help people mend their relationships and strengthen their homes.
So let me say a couple of things. One, I'm not what you see on TV. I'm not a thug. I'm not a dope fiend. I'm a businessman and a father. And I think we have to be tolerant of people and open-minded just off the top of the, just when we look out, when we see them. We are called on to be examples. And the person you're going to be an example to, like you said, you mentor your children, I imagine. You got to be an example to the people that are around you. We're going to have to give some second chances. We're going to have to give, and we cannot disparage an entire ethnicity based on one bad actor. We got to find a way to pay people equally, because capacity, while it is family, but capacity is important. I don't care how good I want to pay. If I don't have the capacity to pay, I can't, however good my intentions are. We live in a country of plenty. It's difficult to live poor when you see everybody around you with more. It's really difficult, and it drives people in the wrong direction a lot of times. So capacity is important, but we got to learn how to be in our community. If I can just get one, if I can just save one, if I can just be an example to one, I've done a good job. We got to, each one, I've heard this before, each one take one. No matter what your ethnicity is, we got to be open. We got to be tolerant to differences. We are different. I don't expect you to think like me, and I know I can't think like you, but I can listen to how you think and take it into consideration. And hopefully you do the same, and celebrate our differences. Man, we're just different. Some of us, we have a lot more in common, but we have differences, and it's okay to be different. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, I guess I guess I can clarify. When I see George Floyd or some of the other, they show videos of people that are being shot, I see a broken life. I see somebody who's desperate, and it's heartbreaking because it's a wasted life. And I'm just wondering how white people, because that seems to be what I'm seeing is we have and you don't have, how can we help and love these people to where drugs and gangs are not so appealing?
I don't know, because
this is Laurent. I want to jump in and push back a little bit because of the fact that I understand relationships and single families and everything. It's a factor, but it is really making now the issue less complex than just seeing that aspect. It is an aspect, and we understand, but the issue is more complex than drugs and everything. I'm a married person, but the decks are stacked. So really, I understand the fact that a family with two will have more leverage, and it is true, it does, because it kind of optimizes the opportunities. But I want everybody to put it in perspective that this is not just the only issue that prevents folks from expanding homeownership and creating generational wealth. This is very important to put it in perspective. Otherwise, we will defeat the purpose of this beautiful and very important seminar that we just had.
Can
Mark,
I
you want to
thank you.
You're welcome.
What I guess I want to say, and everybody's opinion counts, is maintenance of status quo. What we've been doing is getting us where we are. We had a situation, you mentioned George Floyd. So George Floyd, what was the result? The NBA painted Black Lives Matter on the basketball court during the playoffs. They wrote Black Lives Matter down the middle of the street outside the White House. Man, I could care less. Man, give me some policy and some rules and some laws that's going to change capacity. Give me something like that, as opposed to some rhetoric or some writing. Allow me to really enter in. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of history. We can look at a lot of different areas. I believe that people are the same given the same opportunity. I believe they're the same given the same opportunity, and historically it matters. But it is a matter of family. It is a matter of aspirations, and we are in those positions. We have to advocate. If we want to change this, we're going to have to do something outside the box, color outside the laws, color outside the lines, and put some stuff together that's going to allow this to grow. It's not going to get solved in my lifetime, but at least we could stop the decline. How about we stop the decline and start to move in the next direction? This is not, gonna have to think aspirationally and generationally. It didn't just happen. It's gonna take time to get it done, but we're going to have to make it happen by making assertive, positive changes that may be uncomfortable, that may be unfair to some people, because it was unfair to get it there.
Can
All right.
say something
Yeah,
real
one
quick?
more question from John Leonard. He says, what has been the role of lenders contributing to the current challenge? And how do we reach out to them actively to be part of the situation?
So, yeah, you know, lenders, I don't blame, let me say this. I own a mortgage company. So I'm going to tell you that I've never had a loan turned down because my client was Black. And I have almost all Black clients. I have real estate is segregated. But the systems, de facto desegregation generally doesn't happen in my shop. But de jure discrimination, low appraisals, lower income, loan level price adjustments, the policies and systems. We have to go at policies and systems. I went to the White House several years ago, and I was told that, and this was under the Obama administration. I was told that I can't get anything through Congress, but if I could, I would not support or propose, this was coming from the administration, anything that benefited any one segment of the population. I learned that what that taught me was, don't look for new laws, go find a way to, we have enough laws. We have laws on the books that are designed to create equity and inclusion in mortgage finance. We need to stop with the exclusionary stuff or the prohibitive stuff like loan level price adjustments on the back of, we need to save Fannie and Freddie, but we're saving it on the backs of people who can't get financing any other way. We can do this, but we're going to have to attack what seems normal and take a chance. We're going to have to take a chance as Americans to grow as a country.
Good stuff, Mark. I believe I heard one person speak up. We're going to go ahead and take one more question from Mark before our next quick break. I don't know who that was that spoke, but the floor is yours. Last question.
Raquel, I believe that was you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I was actually just going to respond to Diana, and I guess as a whole, I'd like to make the point that as these conversations that we're having are so powerful, and I love every time that we all get together and we're able to put these ideas out here. We learn something new every time, but what I would encourage others, including yourself, Diana, to do is to be careful. Like we're prejudging people. You're making assumptions, continuing to make assumptions about groups of people based on nothing that we're talking about here and based on no one that you see right here on this particular call. So those things that you are implying are the source. We clearly know there are already issues. We know there are issues that are being addressed, but I think we can get to a solution together better if instead of projecting from your perspective, but just listening to the people who are affected, listening to the people that have grown up in these situations and in these neighborhoods, because there's so many successful people of color on this call, yet we've all grown up in these environments and in these settings, so we know something about it. So if we're giving this information and we're asking for understanding and clarity and to work together as a group to come up with some solutions, particularly housing-based solutions, because we are a realtor organization or a lender organization, I just think that it's best served to have these conversations and to be better listeners and encouragers of what we're doing right and working together. So that was all. Thank you.
Can I say?
Can I say something? Can I say something real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, Raquel, thank you so much. I so appreciate that. You know, white people only know what they are shown, okay? And so what you see on TV when you're not in that community and all that really shapes how you think about things and what questions you might have. And so as you correctly point out, the more that I can interact with you and understand where you come from, then I have a better handle about it's not everybody. It's some people. And it is, I mean, it's a problem. I think that's why you see it on TV, and it's heartbreaking. You feel helpless with what you see. But yeah, I mean, I've actually worked with Black realtors, and they're very professional. And you know, I don't really look at people like color, but I do see things that are heartbreaking, you know, and my heart goes out to people that are suffering like that.
Can I say something in closing?
Sure, Mark.
When Joe Biden made the comment about President Obama, he said he's well-spoken and clean-cut. Probably meant well, but that's a racist comment. Why wouldn't he be? George Floyd, if he had been high on dope and heart getting ready to die, that knee on the neck was inappropriate. No matter what color he is, no matter what. We have a different level of experience, and we can't take it out of this housing conversation because it's part of it. It's the root of it. It's really the root of it, and all we're trying to show is the disparity and the difference to hopefully increase the sensitivity to have a real conversation and not just skip along the top, not just ride along the surface. Let's get into it. And so I think the conversation is excellent. I think everybody's comments are excellent in moving forward as a nation. I'm a Black American. That's what I am. I'm an American. And I want all that America promises, not just for me, but for my children and for my community.
I agree.
Thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
Absolutely, Mark. We appreciate you for taking time out to share, you know, your knowledge, your experience, and you know what's been shown to you, through experience and through what you learned. Hopefully, everyone was able to really, soak that in so they can understand how they can implement the solutions that we brought to the table. And I appreciate everyone for even coming to the table today to be open to this conversation, to learn how to become better, to be a better influence and impact with those that we work with, in and out our communities. The individual that I have the privilege to be able to introduce next, he heads up both the Florida and National Minority Economic Civil Rights Organizations, and he's the CEO of Florida's largest nonprofit affordable housing development entity that does not use government funding. After a battle with a major illness, this gentleman decided to use his successful Fortune 25 corporate skills, as well as his military service experience, that led to several business and military awards and medals to give back to community and country. This gentleman began working with minority community organizations around the U.S. for the past 16 years, including serving in a senior executive role with the largest community development corporation in the United States. Through his leadership or his participation in financial institution CRA commitments, it's resulted in over $700 billion worth of additional bank commitments for community reinvestment into minority communities throughout the United States. This gentleman had started out his community economic development career as VP of Development for the National Council of La Raza and a team member that launched the country's first minority-focused housing and commercial real estate CDFI. This gentleman went on to serve as Vice President of Development for the country's largest community development corporation. In 2005, in partnership with the Greenlining Institute, this gentleman took his efforts to Florida and founded the Florida Minority Community Reinvestment Coalition, which is Florida's first statewide minority-focused community economic development collaboration with over 105 participating minority community organizations. As chairman of FMCRC, this gentleman utilized this position to advocate for increased community reinvestment for Florida minority communities. He led the negotiating team that was successful in the development of over $120 billion of community reinvestment commitments to Florida's minority and underserved communities by regions, Wachovia, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, and Fifth Third Bank. Seeing the importance of access to capital for minority communities towards reducing the rising racial wealth gap, he had a focus on access to capital for minority communities throughout the United States. Since 2005, he's assisted in the development and launching of over 16 minority-focused community development funds with over $6 billion worth of capital. He also was a development team member of 2 national Hispanic investment funds with a combined investment capital of $310 million. In addition, he helped to launch and lead the efforts for Florida's first ever minority-focused affordable housing fund through a Tampa-based CDFI. Understanding the importance of job creation in low, moderate income communities to battle poverty, he launched the first Florida minority-focused job creation event, Let's Do Business Florida. In partnership with over 150 minority organizations and major banks and corporations, Let's Do Business Florida focuses on job creation through increased construction contracts to minority construction firms and the development of self-sufficient minority nonprofits to allow them to create incremental income streams to fund job creation programs. Let me go to the next screen. All right, this gentleman has worked with several minority communities around the U.S. advocating the for-profit community development model. He's worked with over 180 minority community economic development organizations throughout the United States to assist in developing and expanding their asset base that would allow them to increase their capacity and ability to be self-sufficient. In 2014, to focus on increasing home equity wealth for minority homeowners and to demonstrate that market-based affordable housing model that could be replicated by other nonprofits to generate both profit and affordable housing, FMCRC launched into affordable housing development. In less than 4 years, the assets and hope market-based for profit affordable housing model has resulted in increasing home values in predominant minority neighborhoods by over $220 million that significantly increased minority household wealth. In 2018, FMCRC launched into affordable housing rentals to demonstrate how the FMCRC market-based for-profit affordable housing model could be utilized to provide affordable rentals while at the same time producing a monthly income stream and significantly increasing the nonprofit's asset equity position. In 2014, FMCRC started out with less than $25,000 of equity and now has over $7 million worth of assets that is a result of FMCRC's affordable rental base, comp market values of rental assets. And in 2020, FMCRC launched Section 8 affordable housing business model to demonstrate how the for-profit model could produce high quality, affordable Section 8 housing and predominantly middle upper income census tracts. And while at the same time producing profit and significantly increasing the equity levels on the FMCRC balance sheet. And finally, in 2019, to address the increasing racial wealth gap and lack of economic inclusion for Blacks and Latinos, this gentleman helped launch the National Minority Community Reinvestment Cooperative, NMCRC, which is an informal national organization made up of Black and Latino-led and focused organizations and leaders committed to a cooperative approach to address the socio-economic needs of the Black and Latino communities throughout the creation of sustainable community economic development opportunities. The cooperative relies on a dynamic set of Black and Latino networks, relationships, common socio-economic interests, and experiences to assist one another for the better good of the overall socio-economic health of all Black and Latino communities. So now that I have my breath back for all that gentleman has been part of, and I got to get some water after all that, but I'm pretty sure if I got to get water just for bringing all that to you guys, this gentleman, I know he's put in work in the field and I'm excited. Make sure you have a pen to take some copious notes. I don't know who Copious is, but take her notes too, because he's about to drop a wealth of knowledge right now. Pina, did you make it to the line this afternoon?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. The floor is yours. Thank you for hopping on with us this afternoon.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I put together, with long story short, I tell people, I've been busy, the last 20 years. But I may be the largest affordable housing nonprofit, minority nonprofit in Florida, but what I really am is still and always will be an economic civil rights advocate. That's what I am. And it's not only for Black and Latinos, but it's really for our country. So I have some slides I put down, I'm going to present to you so you can kind of see how you can get in Louisville and other Black and Latino cities, what we're doing to address and help you address some of this racial economic disparity, particularly in housing, that we've been able to successfully do in other cities. But before I do that, I'd be remiss, after listening to the first speaker, you know, and it was a good question, you know, why don't Blacks and Latinos live in better neighborhoods? You know, on a couple of the speakers, I could not disagree more in that, look, it boils down to economics. And just to show you, you know, that we build for Black Latinos, and yet we have never had a Black Latino not want to live in one of the upper income neighborhoods that we live in, that we build in. Hold on, let me, I'm just going to show you some slides of our housing right now. We've got a bunch of housing being developed, but this is just a few. We build in upper income white neighborhoods with some of the best schools. This is a $700,000 home we're building that will be for a Black or Latino single mom. And we've already got over 100 applicants of Black Latinos. So they want to live in these neighborhoods, in that neighborhood. It's a home I'm building. I just demolished the home. Here's what we're going to replace it in an upper income white neighborhood. Again, white and Black families absolutely want to live in there. They don't want to live in the poor neighborhoods. They want to live if they can afford it. And we put together a program where they can afford it, live in these homes. This is an example of another rental home. This is the quality of life. This is the type of what I call finishes that we provide these poor families. You know, what mother doesn't want to have a kitchen like this to feed, you know, to prepare meals for her family. This is, lastly, this slide, this is, we like to say zip code is destiny. This is a home I'm building on the Tampa River, surrounded by $1 million homes. What Black or Latino family does not want to live there if they could afford it? All of them, all of them. So what we're going to talk about right now is how do we even get there? Well, listen, how we even got here 4 years ago, I actually was going to retire and go on to my next life, which is full-time writer. But we saw racial injustice the last, you know, few years. It got so crazy racially that I decided to get back into and put back on my economic civil rights hat. But what happened even beyond that was something we didn't expect. It was this pandemic. And with this pandemic, unless you have your head in the sand, it exposed a racial economic fault line that not even I saw coming. And it clearly showed that the economic safety nets, such as CRA, such as a lot of the programs they have developed, they're ineffective for Blacks and Latinos. They're not working. And why would we continue to use them? But part of the answer is, a big part of the answer is us. We've got to become more effective and more active. We've got to become a voice, an absolute voice. And I became a voice back in, you know, when I went to Washington, D.C. to put together that first national fund at the end of the Clinton administration. When I saw this data point that 42% of most major cities' populations are people of color, yet those people of color only represent 5% or below of those cities' GDP. You know, you don't have to be an economist to understand that's not good for America in this global economy. And as an ex-military person, that angered me, that showed me that this is critical to us fixing. And even today, and this pandemic though exposed that and showed that this is about Black and Latino economics. And one of the things that we're doing is we're going to start to launch in 50 cities, 50 Black and Latino CRA councils. Like one of the questions that were earlier is what can we do to push the banks to become more economically inclusive? Well, we're going to teach, we launched in Detroit and Baltimore a few months back, and we're going to create 50 Black and Latino CRA councils around the country. And one of the main ingredients that we're going to focus on is housing. I like to put this slide in here because it shows you, all of you in a housing business, you're in probably the single most important industry in the nation. If you look at the direct and indirect consumption of housing, it's a major, it's like, 38% of the dollar, direct and indirect. So that makes it almost imperative that Black and Latinos become bigger consumers. And the way they can become bigger consumers, not only with a job, but the home ownership is absolutely critical for them to achieve. And not rental. I mean, we do rentals, but all our renters have to agree to live in that nice home. They've got to follow a path towards home ownership. And show you how the racial wealth gap, I like to break this down just to show you in a little bit more detail. This breaks down how critical not home ownership, but home equity is to household wealth. If you take home equity and business equity, that's the lion's share. And you could see that those two, and the irony is, for most Black and Latinos, they use their home equity to fund a startup business or to expand their business. So the home business equity impact on home wealth, household wealth, is actually directly or rather indirectly related to home equity. I'd like to show general data on the how home equity is a big part of wealth. I'm going to go through a lot of these pretty quick, so I can try to make that 4 o'clock deadline. But I wanted to give you some data to show empirically there's an issue. And this one's a good one that shows the Black and Latino families are twice as likely to have net zero wealth. Think about that, net zero wealth today. I'll just let you kind of chew on some of this data. Baltimore, we did a program this week, and one of the we broke down the racial wealth gap in Baltimore which is similar to Louisville. It's a high Black populated city, Black city. For Louisville, this is kind of the racial breakdown of white versus Black. Now, I know Mark Alston, he gave some lending data, but that lending data is a new data. And people like myself, economic civil rights advocates, we're going to deal with this with the new administration, with the OCC and with the FRB, because what they've allowed to do, they've allowed banks to pollute the data, the HMDA data, by combining like Louisville with Jefferson County. And so the data doesn't really tell the truth, the whole story. I took the 2016 data, which was the last time that banks were required to provide data by specific city and not join other areas. Look at this. PNC is the #1 bank in your area. They gave 6 loans. Chase gave 1 loan. And these are FHA loans, by the way. And the reason I chose FHA was because 90% of all loans for Black and Latinos and minorities are FHA loans. You can see Fifth Third. So basically, Blacks were provided in 2016 by the top 5 banks 34 home loans. 34 home loans in 2016. How in the heck is that going to increase Black household wealth? No, it's not. And let's kind of dig even to the more the macro picture. A Federal Reserve Bank study, actually at the beginning of this year, was released. It showed in 2019, racial and gender discrimination in America cost our country $2.6 trillion in GDP. So this is bigger than just a Black and Latino issue. This is an American issue. And again, as an ex-military person who dedicated and put his life on the line, was willing to put his life on the line for our country, this scares me as we look toward the future in this global economy. This kind of shows you what's been happening in the last, 12 to 16 months. You're starting to see a lot of the banks step up and figure out how can they become more of the solution rather than contributing more to the problem. Well, one of the things that we're focusing on is what I've become an expert on is CRA. We're going to teach groups around the country to focus on the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. That really was the main linchpin, economic linchpin for minorities and Blacks and Latinos for the last 30 years. And as you can see, I highlighted the net, what does it mean? That the banks are obligated to meet the credit needs of the local communities. So you look at Louisville and 26 loans, home loans in 2016, was that meeting the credit needs for the Black community? My answer is no. Today, we know the CRA is outdated, and by the way, the good news is that it's being revamped as we speak. The CRA is regulated by the FDIC, the FRB, but the OCC regulates 70% of all bank assets in the country. So that's the main bank regulator. The FRB, as we speak, are revamping the 30-year-old rules. The OCC revamped the rules and put in new CR rules last year, which were horrendous, that we're going to do nothing but be more of the same. So the good news, and the OCC being the most important regulator, I like to use this graph because since 1963, it's been all white males that have been the comptrollers, all white males since 1863. Well, it's funny because they'll give you a little story. President Biden was going to pick another white male, Michael Barr, to take over the OCC. And the New York Times got a wind of the story that I was going to do a hunger strike. I had scheduled a hunger strike in Detroit at a Black church and vowed to take that hunger strike to the end if they did not deselect Michael Barr, because we've had enough of enough. We've had enough of enough. Enough's enough. Enough's enough. And the good news is they deselected him and they brought in, 3 candidates. And the second best news that's happened in the past 30 days is that both from the president's office to now, even the regulators have said they want to conjoin and bring together all the CRA, the new rules that are being revamped. They want to make sure that there's collaboration between all 3 agencies and that those new rules are racially relevant, which to me is extremely important. This kind of gives you, this was a comment, a press part of a press release by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. And this is very important for the Black Latinos on the call. It may seem like it's nothing, but understand this. Since 1977, this is the very first time in the history of the CRA and even bank and bank rules that govern HMDA and govern small business. This is the very first time that they've agreed that they're going to make that racial data will be part of the CRA grading system for all banks. So for the first time, there will be racial relevancy to the CRA, and this is big. Because banks regulate our neighborhoods. They regulate housing. Housing is critical to not only our economy, but housing is a major part of the CRA and the bank's grading on the CRA. And what I also wanted to talk just a little bit about was that this data, as we start to talk about it, this is where we're trying to get more Black Latinos engaged in revamping the rules and being heard in Washington, D.C. as these rules are being revamped. And one of the things that we're hoping for out of this also, by the way, the leading candidate for the office, for the comptroller of the currency is Professor Barahan, who, by the way, was endorsed by 32 Black Congress people, wrote a letter to President Biden a week and a half ago, stating that they want Professor Barahan to be the new comptroller because she is an expert on the racial wealth gap. And what we're doing across, to get back, the CRA is critical. It's changing as we speak. It's going to be racial relevant, but it does not mean a darn thing unless your community engages it. In Florida, we're good. In Baltimore, we're good. In Detroit, we're good. In other cities that are coming, Black and Latinos are coming together to engage it with what they call Black and Latino CRA councils. They're addressing it. And why is it important as you look at these CRA, as you look at CRA and the banks, every bank has to go through a CRA evaluation. Small banks, intermediate banks, and large banks. I'm giving you sort of the 1,000-foot view, just so you can understand what CRA evaluations are about. They fight for outstanding, satisfactory, need to improve, substantial non-compliance. These are the grades they get. As a point, most banks receive either outstanding or satisfactory. And when I'm in a meeting with a banker, I tell them if they received outstanding, I don't want to hear it, because we knew that it was easy for banks to get outstanding ratings because they really weren't racially relevant. And I always like to, now I can point to the pandemic, and I point to the pandemic, which clearly showed that the #1 economic safety net for Black Latinos in CRA was not effective. Big banks, such as, you've got 3 big banks that control the market, that are part of the top 3. They go through a lending test, an investment test, a service test. The lending test, if you look at this, it's amount of loan, it's focused on LMI, distribution of loans in LMI areas, but it also counts for projects outside of LMI areas if it's going to impact LMI families and businesses. The investment test, just want to give you kind of, what that means for a bank when they're under a CRA evaluation. The service test, the branches, as you know, a lot of banks are closing branches, and they're closing branches in particularly Black neighborhoods. With the new administration and the new comptroller and a refocus toward Black and Latino neighborhoods by the Federal Reserve Board, we'll be looking at this, very closely as they close branches and making sure that they aren't closing branches in predominantly Black neighborhoods. This kind of gives you, the small bank, these are, for those, you have a few small banks in your area, but mostly the intermediate and what they call intermediate large banks will be applicable as it relates to CRA for Louisville. Reason I put something up on community development is that a major piece of community development that all large banks and intermediate banks are graded on is affordable housing. Now, one of the things that a little trick that the banks use that we're now, a lot of us are focusing on, particularly with the banking regulators, is that, like Bank of America was bragging, Bank of America, for instance, their CEO or the person in charge of CRA was on record about 6 months ago bragging that they've spent $30 billion on affordable housing. But what she did mention was at 80%, 85% of that was for multifamily tax credit projects. Most of the credits that the banks are getting are for apartments, tax credit, rentals, which again has no impact on home ownership. Again, loan investment services that support, enable, or facilitate neighborhood stabilization programs. We're hoping that the NSP under the new president is revived and that they refocus on the NSP as a program to deliver affordable housing dollars back to Black Latino neighborhoods. I'm just going to go through some of these real quick so we can, I want to be sensitive to timing. This talks about affordable housing. It must be affordable mortgage or rent payment for a low moderate income family or individual to determine if affordable, use demographics, blah, et cetera. want to go back to that 2016 data. So if they gave out, the top 5 banks gave out 26 loans, how then did the bank meet that CRA requirement? Well, it must be affordable mortgage. Again, again, most of the banks are receiving CRA affordable housing credits through multifamily projects. One of the things that they're adding, which is going to be monumental, particularly for Blacks and Latinos, is Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act. Just this year, I was actually part of a small team that met with Gene Sperling, who was the head of the Obama's Economic Council when he got in office. And we told them we needed data for small business, that the banks were discriminating on lending to Blacks and Latinos. And I remember them mentioning, well, there's no enforcement. We don't need enforcement. We just need the data. Long story short, it got passed with the Dodd-Frank bill, but the banks and others have been fighting this for to enforce it for the last 10 years. This is over 10 years old. And finally, because of a lawsuit by the California Reinvestment Coalition, sued the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau last year, and they won the lawsuit. So this year, the banks must report, each bank must report to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they must report all loans by race, gender, and zip code. So we're going to find out which banks are lending and not lending, and that is going to be, but the good news is that data will count toward a bank's CRA grade. And by the way, I think this is going to be the single most important law that's passed since the Fair House Act of 1968. This is monumental, even though it has no enforcement. But remember, if Bank of America, let's say in Baltimore, that 68% minority, or rather Black, and only 3%, 5% of their small business loans are going to Blacks in Baltimore, you can't hide from that fact. That's data that you can't hide from. And that will impact their brand. And that was always our assumption, and what we always, the reason we fought so hard for this law was because we know the truth will impact a major corporation's brand if it's shown to be discriminatory in its lending. One of the things that we're pushing at the cities, that we're working with cities to do, Black Latinos in each city that we're working in, is to put together a CRA agreement with each major bank that targets specifically Black and Latino investments and lending, to include home ownership. The benefits of an agreement is that it's a public declaration that the banks, that they will pledge to invest a certain amount of money in Black and Latino neighborhoods. I've worked with Greenlining Institute, was the first in the country to come up with bank CRA agreements, and I was mentored by the founders of Greenlining. They put together over $5 trillion of CRA agreements since their inception. A federal study in 2002 found CRA agreements increased bank lending to LMI borrowers and borrowers of color by up to 20%. They work. In other words, they're effective. They work. And one thing that we're adding to all, we're also including in the CRA agreements a philanthropic part, grants to help nonprofits like in Louisville and other highly populated Black and Latino cities, so they can build up some of these service agents that really are at the front lines for our communities. This kind of gives a little bit more information on the CRA agreements. The bank, that it's a 5-year period. And by the way, regular meetings are held every year, once a year, with each bank to review their agreements. This kind of gives you, we get down into the weeds a little bit more. We go into actual specific lending and by race too. Now, one of the other things that a tool that we use are mergers. A bank, when they're going to merge, like right now, Huntington Bank is merging with TCF Bank. PNC is merging and buying BMO. the United States operation. They must get approved by both, by either the Federal Reserve Board. Both of those banks are accountable to the OCC. The OCC has a public comment period that each community can write and comment on that bank's lack of, I guess, lending or impact for the communities. And we work with we work heavily in this area with Black Latino leaders to ensure that they get comments in, because the Federal Reserve Board and OCC, they look at those comments. They absolutely look, and in a little bit, I'm going to show you what some of those comments on the Huntington TCF, what it brought about because of 98 comments made by Black leaders in Detroit. Wells Fargo, because of a merger, they committed show you that, they will commit to a city. These banks will commit to a city. They committed 1.6 billion in lending and philanthropy over 5 years for one small city, District of Columbia. To get back, Black and Latino groups for this Detroit, for this Huntington TCF merger, we taught them how to kind of we organized them and taught them how to be a Black voice. They opposed the merger, and they, I think there was like 98 comments that they submitted to the Federal Reserve Board and OCC. That resulted, just those comments resulted, and the public voice of the Blacks in Detroit resulted in this gentleman here, on to your top left, Donald Dennis. Huntington hired immediately the first Black senior executive in the history of that bank. On that call, there's also two of the CEOs for the bank that attended that call. And one of the byproducts that came out of that call, and the benefits that came out of that call, and this voice that grew for Blacks in Detroit as it relates to CRA, the bank now is coming out soon with a major Black commitment for Detroit and their entire service area that they bank in. And two, and I think I'm most proud of this, they have committed money already to launch the first Black focused affordable housing CDFI loan bank that will lend money to Black and Latino nonprofits to build more affordable housing. And what I like, and it's called the Black and Latino Affordable Housing Development Fund. And what I love about that is that it has the word Black and Latino in it. That, ladies and gentlemen, that's what happens when you become a voice. It doesn't happen if you're just voiceless and you're not heard. Baltimore Baltimore now have launched their Black and Latino CRA Council. And they had their first, they're measuring, this is some of like what they're going to focus on with banks in Baltimore. Affordable rentals, for sale housing, increasing Black and Latino home ownership, and small businesses. And by the way, all that is predicated on one thing: capital, access to capital. And what they're going to ask for all the top 11 banks is $33 billion over 5 years targeted towards Black and Latino communities and businesses. They had their first town hall meeting this week, actually. It was just 2 days ago, attended by, it had a max, it was a Zoom meeting. It could only hold 100. And I think they said more than 200 people tried to get on, and it kind of crashed it for a little bit. But they're organizing the entire community as we speak. That is in essence, what we're doing here. And I heard people talking about what can be done, and things are going to remain the same. I don't accept that they're going to be the same until I die. I'm going to die trying. And I tell folks, I've been on 3 hunger strikes. I was willing to go on a hunger strike recently against the President of the United States. And if I'm willing to do that for your community, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to be heard, to do to be heard? Because ladies and gentlemen, nothing's going to happen without action. I can guarantee you one thing. There are several cities that are now like Baltimore, Detroit, Jacksonville. They're going to be heard. My question is, with Louisville, do you want to be heard? Can't be heard unless you become a voice. And lastly, I'd like to conclude with this. Somebody talked about, there was a discussion at the end about poverty and George Floyd. And I like to comment on that with just this one thing that's actually personal to me. Years ago, my brother was murdered. And he was murdered by a Latino in a poor neighborhood. Violently, innocently. He was innocent. An innocent man murdered by another Latino. And one of the city leaders came to me because, I had, in that city, I had some clout. And they said, we're going to we know, and they know who did it. They got to get enough evidence. And they asked me, he said, listen, you want us, we'll go for the death penalty on this one. And I told that city councilman and city attorney, no. If you charge him and go after him with the death penalty, I'll go on a hunger strike right in front of the case on the court steps. And they thought I was crazy. Why? Why are you opposed to it? And I'll tell you what I told them, and it applies today. And this is why I'm engaged to the depth, emotionally and spiritually, that I'm engaged in to this day. Show me one child. I told this to them, to the man who murdered my brother, and why I do not want the death penalty for him, was show me one child, one child. I challenge any of you on this call, show me one child, black, white, or brown, rich or poor. Show me one child that was born to kill or steal or to hurt others. There's no such child. But I will tell you this, that's the disease of poverty. That's what poverty does. So when you look at George Floyd, no, he's a victim of poverty. And people on this call, we're leaders. It won't stop unless you rise up. You've seen the marches from the people. It is people like us who have contacts with bank leaders, political leaders. It is up to you to become that voice and to change things and to bring economic inclusion for Black and brown people in your city and other cities. And I will tell you this, it's not only good for Black and brown people, but this will make America stronger. This is also about America. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox, and if you have any questions, and I'll give, by the way, I'll send a copy of this presentation. I know I went over it quick, but I'll send a copy of that to Curtis in case anybody wants it.
All right, good stuff. Well, that was incredible. Al, I wanted to say thank you for sharing that. I mean, it wasn't just the knowledge, it was the passion. That you have a clear-cut vision of what you want to be able to help people, and just to be able to go on numerous hunger strikes to make those things happen, and not just for yourself, but even people that may not have been on the same end as you. This Eric Thomas has a quote. He says, when you want success as bad as you want air, success is inevitable. Well,
Exactly.
you want that vision more than you want to eat. So that's powerful, and you've done it over and over and over again. And so we appreciate you for everything that you're doing, in the community, but also how you're multiplying yourself and your efforts through the partnerships that you have with your various organizations, and even just hopping on the line here with the folks here that are here this afternoon to work in their communities. We'll open it up for two quick questions. If anyone has any questions for him, I'm going to open up the floor. If you have two quick questions, we'll start with that for right now. Any questions?
This is Yolanda Buckner. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you.
I just want to comment that, you know, I think that the speaker is on the right track with the CRA agreements. Those make a difference because, you know, we have one bank that has a commitment with NAREB. And just by giving the $1,500 toward the closing costs, you know, they were able to do 300 loans because of it. Yep. So I think the data of showing what loans these banks are making among the races, I think that needs to be more public. Now, the reason behind Black families and Black individuals in my career, them not going to the banks sometimes is because if I had a client and I thought that, okay, I want to have multiple chances in case they didn't qualify for their loan based on the criteria. So many of us just went to mortgage brokers first anyway, just so that you could have more opportunities for that buyer to get approved. And so that was one of the reasons I didn't use banks as much. Okay, so I think that is an issue. So I appreciate you're saying that, and that is on the right track. And we here in Louisville need to hold the banks more accountable, and that money go towards helping with the credit issues instead of someone walking in the bank and being denied. You know, that money is used towards education on, you know, fixing the credit or doing what they need to do with their credit so that they can qualify because of the disproportionate of conventional loans versus FHA loans. So I don't know what reasons the banks are going to give as to why they don't do those loans. And if you can speak to that and say, okay, this is why they say they didn't do the loans, or they're going to say, well, it was credit, it was their debt to income, you know, what was it? But that was why I didn't go as a professional, because if I went to a mortgage broker, they had at least 3 or 4 investors that they could possibly send that borrower to and get approved. And that's, you know, so that's why I don't go to them first because of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, Yolanda. And I got to tell you that banks are critical in that why your customers have, you know, it's better for them to use a bank is that they can establish a credit history, right, with the bank. And that history will help out in future loans, help out, you know, with them able to, with checking accounts, savings accounts, all the different services that a bank could provide, a mortgage company doesn't provide and can provide. So bank relationships are critical. And to your question on what can be done, it's really easy, you know, in that you got to meet with the banks. They're not, you know, I know for a fact, you know, people in Louisville, you know, the Black community in Louisville is not heard by the top 5 banks, you know, in regard as a collective, maybe individually or as an organization, but as a collective, you know, and you sit down and talk to the banks and make them more accountable. And the good news is, folks, this pandemic, I have not met or talked to one CEO of a major bank that understands it and wants to do something about it. Like, they're serious. This is the best, as long as I've been involved in economic civil rights, I've never seen a more opportune time where they saw what this pandemic did, but it also scared them because, remember, a bank wants to be valued and live for 100 years, for 1,000 years. But if Black and brown people are going to be a majority of this country's population in 40 years, and they're only contributing 5% of the GDP, and their subsequent health, you know, disasters and so forth, this country, you know, it can't survive as the #1 economic power in the world. So, but it starts with communication, a collective communication, you know. So the answer would be, you know, for you to, you know, get, you know, a handful of people together and meet with the banks and develop and talk out the issue, and then talk out solutions. But you meet with leadership. You meet with the state president, you know, of PNC, of Chase. You don't meet with a, with a low-level person because they can't make any decisions. But the state president can make a decision on many things. And if he can't, he'll go to corporate, and find a way that they can overcome an obstacle.
All right, good stuff. We have another question. Al, how do you structure your collaboration agreements with your collaborators and with the lenders? And does it include mortgage brokers?
Yeah, actually, each of the collaborators, right, the collaborations that are happening right now, they all of them have brokers and minority realtors. I mean, it's critical. I mean, and the reason I push that is that all the data that Mark Alston showed on the racial wealth gap and that I showed you, unequivocally, housing is critical to wealth, right? Bar none, the most important. So it would be asinine not to have people engaged in the housing industry that are not part of a collaboration or a collective. Now, what we've done is everything we're talking about and everything I showed you quickly, we've already been doing it for 20 years successfully. But what I decided to do is dedicate my life over the next 4 years, going around the country, teaching Black Latino communities how to replicate it. So we have sample agreements. We've got boilerplates. Everything's already, nothing's new. It's already been invented. It's just a matter of passing on that information to others that they can use and then give them. And then what I do is I become advisor. I've got some others that are part of this circle. We advise these collaborations, and it's like my old mentor told me, let's go to New City and make new mistakes. So if we see somebody, making on the road to a mistake, we'll say, no, that doesn't work. Here's what you should do. And, 9 out of 10 times they'll listen. That 1 out of 10 times they don't listen, they're going to fail and go, okay, you're right. Yeah. When we know we're right, we know we're right. So to that question, there's many of us. And by the way, the good news is too, the cities that have already launched, like Detroit and Baltimore, they've already said publicly they will help any other Black community in the United States that wants to follow them and teach them how they've been able to start out. Remember, it started out from scratch, never been done. And look, they got 2 banks so far to make major commitments, and in one city, and several banks in another city to make commitments and to start walking down toward the path toward Black home ownership, increasing it significantly.
We appreciate you for everything that you shared this afternoon and everything that you continue to do in the community, and your commitment, to your vision to see that people, get that justice that they deserve, and make sure that everyone has equal access. There's a proverb that says, an unplowed field produces food for the poor, but injustice sweeps it away. And then there's another psalm that says to defend the weak and the fatherless, and uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, and rescue the weak and needy, and deliver them from the hand of the wicked. We see that you guys, not just yourself, but Mark and Art, you guys are out there in the community, in the marketplace, doing just that. So I appreciate you for taking time out of your schedule to do that, and share with the folks here on the line. And we're going to go ahead and transition to our the president of the Louisville chapter of NAREB, Mr. Curtis Owens, to bring out Mrs. Elizabeth Monarch. So Mr. Owens, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. You did an excellent job. Wasn't this a wonderful session?
Yes.
We got so much information and knowledge. We thank all 3 of the speakers. We thank you, Mr. Art Crosby, for your information that you provided for us. We thank you, Mr. Mark Alston, for all the way from Los Angeles, California, bringing this insightful information to us. And we thank you, Mr. Al Pina, for bringing it home for us from Florida. And we want you in Louisville, Mr. Pina. We're gonna do some things, and we're going to do some things with NAREB, and we want to talk to you further. But it's been a great collaboration. I think we've all learned a lot, and I hope everybody appreciated it and got a lot out of this session. And I want to wrap this session up with Miss Elizabeth Monarch. We're going to have her to have some words to finalize our session. Treasurer of Kentucky Realtors and chairperson of the Diversity Equity Task Force of KYR. Elizabeth?
Well, thank you, Curtis. And I'm not going to wear anybody's patience. We just want to say thank you to Curtis and to Will Fisher and to NAREB. I am just so excited that we were able to bring this joint event. I know we had a lot of people that came on and came off the call. And Jeff Johnson, you did a fantastic job, and just can't thank you enough. And I know that you have always been so supportive of the real estate community and have family that's in the real estate community. But on behalf of the Kentucky Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, many of our members were on here. We just want to say thank you. Get involved. Go into action. There's so many things you can do at NAREB. There's so many things that we've got going on at the Kentucky Realtors. We currently have a book club. It's called Open Mind, Open Books, and Lester Sanders, Lamont Breland, Raquel, they have just poured out their hearts and time into this book club. We encourage you to jump on. We're going to have that next Thursday. And Curtis, again, thank you for your service. Will, thank you for all you do on fair housing on the National Association of Realtors level. And I appreciate you letting me say a few words.
Thank you so much. This ends our presentation for the day. We appreciate y'all. Have a great week.